As Anderson stood, Callie took the opportunity to admonish Nick.
Wait here and be ready in case we need you.
Nick was playing a game on his Omni tool. The puzzle was designed for biotics, so there were no physical controls, just receptors through which dark energy could be channeled.
Yeah,
He said without looking up.
Then we're going to the cube, right? Right.
Callie agreed as she got up to leave.
Wish us luck.
Having returned to the main staircase, Anderson and Callie followed it up to the petitioner's stage. It was one thing to see it on screen, and another to actually stand on the platform and look across 50 meters of empty space to where the council members were seated. The Asari was on the far left. The Solarian came next, followed by the Turian and Human. A 5-meter-tall holographic likeness of each person could be seen over the council members' heads, making it possible for petitioners to see their facial expressions. Though not in uniform, Anderson stood as if he was, with his back ramrod straight and his arms at his sides. He had black hair, a rounded face, and olive-colored skin. Callie had served in the military many years earlier, but had spent even more time as a civilian. Nevertheless, she understood that appearances were important and was careful to maintain eye contact with the council members. The Asari was the first to speak.
Greetings, Admiral Anderson and Miss Sanders. First, before you make your report, let me say how much we appreciate the work you've been doing. Who will speak first?
I guess I will.
Anderson replied.
As you know, Miss Sanders and I agreed to follow up behind the investigation of what took place at the Grissom Academy, and after considerable study, we believe that the Reapers were involved.
The Reapers? The Human council member inquired cynically. Or Cerberus? Frankly, I feel the Reaper angle to be a bit far-fetched. Knowing the man as he did, Anderson had attempted to lobby the council member in advance of the meeting, but with no success. So, being unable to rely on support from that quarter, Anderson chose his words with care.
Both, actually.
He replied.
There is evidence that Paul Grayson, the man who invaded the academy and murdered a number of staff members, was a Cerberus operative at one time. Then, for reasons we aren't sure of, the elusive man turned on him. At that point, he was imprisoned on a space station and subjected to a series of experiments that placed him under Reaper control. We know because we saw the lab with our own eyes. It's difficult to say exactly how much influence the Reapers had over Grayson, but we think it was extensive.
Oh, you do you?
The Turian council member inquired.
Based on what? I've read the reports, and the man was a red sand addict. You admit that he was employed by Cerberus. Why concoct elaborate theories regarding the Reapers when his motivations are so obvious?
What you're saying is true.
Callie admitted.
Grayson was an addict, but he was also the parent of one of my students, a very talented biotic named Jillian. And Grayson doted on his daughter. So to attack the place where she went to school ran contrary to his interests. But he did it anyway. And where did he go? To our research lab, the place where all of the data pertaining to our students was stored. Then, after killing 3 staff members, he entered the OSD library where every readout and every test result were stored. Moments later, he began to send the data out.
You have evidence of that? The Human demanded. Calls that went out over the extranet? You can prove that Grayson sent information to the Reapers?
No.
Anderson admitted.
We can't prove it, but Grayson's body had been extensively modified, and we believe he had the capacity to transfer information without using conventional communications technologies.
Even so,
The Asari said reasonably.
isn't it more reasonable to assume that Grayson was acting on behalf of Cerberus? And that the data was sent to them? No offense, Admiral, but the person in question worked for Cerberus, a pro-human organization that's willing to do just about anything to advance its cause. And you are human. Therefore, it would be understandable if you sought to shift the blame away from your own kind. Not consciously, I know that you're too professional for that, but unconsciously. As for Miss Sanders, there is evidence to suggest that Grayson liked and trusted her, and perhaps that was enough to influence her judgments.
Anderson felt a rising sense of resentment. It took all of the discipline acquired during a career in the Navy to keep from snapping at her.
Cerberus is a threat,
He said tightly.
but if you read all of the material that Miss Sanders and I submitted prior to this presentation, you know that Grayson's body was examined by 3 independent scientists, and they agreed that his implants were of unknown origin. Plus, to the extent that they could be tested, the mechanisms installed in his body are far too exotic to have been created by Cerberus. But seeing is believing. So with your permission, I would like to call for Exhibit A.
The Human council member produced a look of pained exasperation before leaning back in his chair. If you must, the sooner this farce is over, the better. A spotlight came on and a gentle hiss was heard as a glistening metal column extruded from the floor below. It rose until the display positioned on top of the piston was located halfway between the council members and the petitioner's stage. And that was where the council members saw the thing that had been Grayson. The body was enclosed in a transparent stasis field. It sparkled as dust motes came into contact with it. Grayson's body was naked, and his skin had a grayish tint. There were 2 blue-edged projectile holes near the center of his forehead, and his eyes were disturbingly open, as if looking up at the person who had pulled the trigger. Considerable damage had been done to Grayson's torso as well. The implants that had been installed in his limbs were dead now, bereft of the energy that once animated them, but could still be seen running snake-like under the thin, semi-translucent covering of his flesh. It was as if his entire body had been systematically repurposed.
By the goddess.
The Asari council member said, feelingly.
I had no idea. The poor man.
The poor man, indeed, her human counterpart agreed soberly. One can only imagine his suffering, but much as it pains me to say it, there are no observable limits to man's inhumanity to man. I can't explain where Grayson's implants came from or what their purpose was, but Cerberus is known for its cruelty, and I still don't see a credible connection to the Reapers.
I agree,
The Solarian put in.
but I don't think we can afford to simply dismiss the possibility of Reaper involvement. I suggest that Admiral Anderson and Miss Sanders be encouraged to continue their investigation. Assuming they're willing, that is.
Anderson looked at Callie and saw her nod. His eyes flicked back to the Solarian.
We're willing.
Good.
The Asari said, as if glad to dispose of the matter.
Please remove the body. We've seen enough.
Even though the public had been forced to leave the amphitheater, dozens of the Citadel's employees were still present. As the spotlight was extinguished and Grayson's body rode the gleaming shaft down into the staging area located beneath the main floor, one of the uniformed functionaries took a look around. He had 2 employers, and the second had an unquenchable thirst for information. He slipped away. Callie entered the waiting room and scanned the seats. Nick was nowhere to be seen. Most of the other petitioners had left by then, but a Solarian was present and still waiting his turn.
Excuse me.
Callie said.
We left a teenage boy here. Do you know where he went?
The Solarian looked up from his Omni tool.
He left about 15 minutes ago. I haven't seen him since.
Callie thanked him, activated her Omni tool, and spoke Nick's name. What she got was a recording.
This is Nick. Leave a message, I'll call you back.
No answer?
Anderson inquired.
Just voicemail.
Callie was worried, and it was visible on her face.
I told him to stay here.
You know, Nick. Chances are he got bored and took off for the cube. He's been talking about the place all morning.
You're probably right.
Callie agreed.
But let's make sure the cube is on the way home.
Anderson thought Callie was a bit too attentive where Nick was concerned. The boy was 18, for God's sake. But she'd been responsible for Nick's well-being at the academy and agreed to serve as the boy's guardian during his stay on the Citadel. A responsibility she took very seriously. They took the glassed-in elevator down to the ground floor and left through the main entrance. The same Turian was on duty, so Callie paused to speak with him.
We passed through security earlier with a teenager named Nick Donahue. Have you seen him?
The police officer nodded.
He left 15 or 20 minutes ago.
Callie frowned.
And you let him go?
The Turian was clearly annoyed.
My job is to keep people out, not in. And if you lost the boy, whose fault is that?
Anderson chose to intervene before Callie could reply.
We understand. Was he alone or with someone?
He was alone.
Anderson looked at Callie.
That's good. Come on.
It took a short shuttle ride and the better part of 15 minutes to reach the workout facility called the Cube. It had been built by Biotics for Biotics as a place where they could compete with each other and sharpen their skills. In order to join, a person had to have a proven ability to throw, pin, or block objects, or to use spatial distortion to destroy targets with rapidly shifting mass fields. The Asari were natural biotics, although some were more skilled than others. But for other races, including the Krogan, Turians, Solarians, and humans, biotic abilities were the result of exposure to Element Zero, or EZO. And most, if not all, biotics were equipped with implants called bioamps that served to amplify and synchronize their talents. Such individuals were classed as Level 1, Level 2, or Level 3, according to their strength and stability. Nick was a Level 2 and had been working out at the Cube in hopes of qualifying as a Level 3. The gym, if that was the right word, was located on a dimly lit commercial thoroughfare and identified with a glowing sign. A reptilian Krogan was stationed outside the front door to keep the merely curious away. He was about 2 meters tall and weighed upwards of 150 kilograms. Like all of his kind, the doorkeeper had a slightly hunchbacked appearance, as a result of the shell-like layers of flesh and bone that rode his powerful shoulders. His face was flat, brutish, and notable for the absence of any discernible ears or nose. A pair of small, wide-set eyes regarded Anderson with a brooding hostility. His voice sounded like a gravel crusher in low gear.
Members only.
Our son is a member.
Callie lied.
We'd like to watch him work out.
Name?
Nick Donahue.
The Krogan eyed his terminal, located what he was looking for, and uttered a grunt.
You can enter.
The door gave access to a cramped lobby from which members could access the locker room and the area beyond. A narrow flight of stairs led up to a small balcony where spectators could view the action below.
Come on.
Callie said.
We'll watch him throw people around.
And then we'll chew him out.
Anderson said, sort of voice as he followed her up. The viewing area was empty, so they followed a ramp down to the front row where they had a good view of the cube-shaped space for which the gym was named. The walls were padded and divided into softly glowing squares, so that when a Solarian was thrown across the room, he was able to bounce off and land uninjured. One of the boxes lit up. A tone was heard, and a computer-generated voice delivered the score.
5-3, advantage Atlas.
But the match was far from over, as became apparent when the Solarian's Turian opponent was lifted off the cushioned floor and brought back down with considerable force.
5-4,
The voice proclaimed.
advantage Atlas.
I don't see Nick.
Callie said as she peered over the edge. At least a dozen biotics were down on the main floor, sitting or standing along the walls. Some of them clapped as the point was scored, but were forced to scatter when the Turian took his revenge and the Solarian came flying their way.
I think the office is in the basement. Let's see if he checked in.
Having made their way down to the main floor, and from there to the basement, the pair found themselves in a dimly lit office. A roly-poly Volus was ensconced behind a messy desk.
Earth Clan biotics are welcome here. One membership or two?
None.
Callie answered.
We're trying to locate our son, Nick Donahue. Has he been here today?
The Volus turned to his terminal, entered the name, and turned back.
No, he hasn't. You could extend his membership, though. 250 credits for 6 months.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Anderson said firmly.
Tell me something. Does our son have friends here? People he tends to hang out with?
The Volus shrugged.
I don't have time to track personal relationships. But I have seen your son with Acosta Lem and Arius Solis. They work out together.
Who are they?
Callie wanted to know.
Lem is a Solarian, and Solis is a Turian. Both are listed as level 3s.
Have they been in today?
The Volus consulted the terminal.
No.
Where do they live?
Anderson inquired.
We'd like to speak with them.
The Volus hesitated as if reluctant to part with the information, but when Anderson placed both fists on the desk and frowned, the Volus complied. 3 minutes later, the humans were back on the street. Callie eyed the slip of paper.
Lem and Salas share the same address.
Anderson didn't like that, not one little bit, but he decided to keep his concerns to himself as they dropped 2 levels down and made their way through increasingly claustrophobic streets lined with bars, strip joints, and sim clubs. Some of the people who swirled around them watched the couple the way predators eye their prey. But appearances were everything, and thanks to the fact that Anderson and Callie looked like they knew what they were doing, they were allowed to pass unimpeded.
Here it is.
Callie said as they arrived in front of a seedy-looking structure. The sign out front read Sun Tzu Electronics. A commercial building seemed like an unlikely place for the biotics to live. Anderson opened the door and they went inside. A middle-aged woman was seated behind the front desk. She smiled.
Can I help you? Yes.
Callie replied.
We're looking for Acosta Lem and Arius Salas. We were told they live here.
The receptionist frowned.
There must be some mistake. Nobody lives here. Other than the duct rats, that is, and they don't have names.
You're sure?
The woman nodded.
I'm sure. There are 3 employees, and we all go home at night.
They thanked her and left. The moment Callie was outside, she made another call and got the same result. Nick was missing.